Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show, my first Total Soccer Show of the new year. I am Taylor Rockwell. I am excited to do some updating of Major League Soccer. It's been a while since we talked MLS Joe Lowry, and in that time, MLS did all the things. Everybody was fired and hired and moved. Lots of stuff going down.
Yeah, it does kind of feel that way, Taylor. You take a break from MLS, and all of a sudden you're slapped in the face with 1,000 different news items. This is my theory on sports, and I suppose just people in general, is that we like new things, right? Old things don't excite us anymore. We like new things, always. That's, I suppose, why social media is what it is these days. This is the best time of the year in MLS. The part where we're not actually watching the soccer, we're just thinking about watching the soccer and thinking about how different it's going to be than the last time we watched all these teams play. I don't know exactly what or why or how this is in the human psyche, but the best time of the sports calendar is when you're thinking about sports and somehow not actually watching them.
Jeff Ruda, you are nodding along. Is it officially wait till next season time of the year for you when we start to talk ourselves into moves that are being made and how it's totally going to make the difference?
Yeah, it's funny that the best part of the MLS calendar is the part you can't watch MLS live is a backhanded compliment of sorts. But no, I mean it's there's a lot. It's that like American off season that every American sports fan loves. It's creeping into your soccer.
Yeah.
I think we already have two teams that sadly know that they're counting down to 2027 already, which is a bit of a bummer. Well, we'll start with one of them probably in terms of to scale with the Galaxy, but yeah, it's good to be back. It's been a few weeks since I've been able to be on, so thanks for having me back.
My two teams, by the way, are Montreal and Houston. I'm just going to toss
those are the free spaces on your bingo card.
Fair enough. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying those are my two. Mostly Montreal.
Sure.
Pretty excited to find out who that second team is. But first, we should talk about who the first team is, even though they've already been teased and openly stated. It's the Galaxy. We get the news that Riqui Puig will miss another season or thereabouts. Do we know for sure, was it a re-injury of this? Like, was it an existing issue that wasn't fixed by the surgery, or was it a new injury as he was rehabbing?
Yeah, we don't have all the details at this stage, at least not publicly, but he had a second surgery on his left ACL. So that is what we do know. How exactly this all came together is not so certain. Taylor Twellman has alluded to some of his takes, which I didn't hear throughout the season, but I don't doubt existed, that he was not so sure that Puig will be back for 2026. That is turning out to be the case because he will not be back until 2027.
Is that when the last week of the season he said, I'm not sure Puig is going to be back this season, and then got to point to it later on?
like I said, bold. I don't know when those came down. I do believe that is a real thing because we never heard anything last year, right? I mean, the Puig ACL tear happened late in the 2024 season, happened in the second to last game of the season for the LA Galaxy, and the talking point was immediately after MLS Cup, well, the Galaxy aren't going to put him on the season-ending injury list, which would have given them the ability to use his DP slot for 2025 because they hoped that he would be back. And then he just wasn't. He was back in limited training but was never really able to go. And now maybe we're finding out at least part of why that was the case.
I think it is really interesting, and I don't know if we'll ever know, if it was a re-injury or if it was that they didn't fully fix something in that initial surgery. Not that it makes a huge difference, but one indicates a much larger problem and a more maybe consistent problem going forward if it is a re-injury, if it is something else that was torn when he was trying to come back. Either way, pretty disastrous for the Galaxy, and that's maybe an understatement because like last season you can kind of rest on your laurels of having won a MLS Cup, of pushing to make that happen, of having Riqui Puig tear his ACL and still finding a way to win, and him still finding a way to play a little bit. This year, I don't know if you can continue to rest on those laurels so much. I don't know if you get 2 years of, well, we won it recently and our guy's hurt, so money please, I guess? Like, I think they're going to have to make some moves, but I'm not sure the type of moves they can even make.
Yeah, and as Joe alluded to, the season-ending injury list does afford them another designated player slot, and it's something that Twellman had actually posted that it will be a striker. And I personally think that's the wrong decision. I think that's like a kind of ridiculous way to do this because I think ultimately the issues that they had last year, yeah, they couldn't really score, but they also couldn't facilitate. They couldn't coherently play soccer further back in the field, which generally makes it harder for you to score, right? And I think this was the opportunity to kind of look and say, we need to find our ideal midfield partner for Riqui Puig, or we need our defensive anchor who's going to stop the goals from bleeding in like they did throughout, especially the first half of 2025 for the LA Galaxy. And instead to go with, well, we had to trade Joveljic to get CAC compliant last year, but let's go ahead and bring in a more expensive striker to create new headaches for next year. Like, then I'm sure that your plan is one of Peck or Paintsel or DP9 plays their way back into the transfer market. But I don't know. Both of them looked really locked in towards the end of last year in a way that we hadn't seen early in the season when they were really frustrated by the lack of consistent play behind them. And they still seem like players you can build an MLS Cup winner around. They do still need to make a lot of moves to make this thing work, and they need to make more moves than they would have if Riqui Puig was coming back. But I'm just not sure, and I suppose they have fortified at center back adequately, I would say, so that's a good start. But I just think that there were areas that were higher priority zones than getting a DP9, which I think is kind of being found out to be sort of a foolish place to use one of your DP slots if you want to win MLS Cup.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that unless the 9 is a really, really good player, and it's hard to find those kind of guys.
Joe, what if he scored 2 goals in the Romanian league?
Yeah, we could do
it
that.
all back.
We could do that. We'll get to that. Hopefully we'll get to that. I think I have fewer problems with the Galaxy going out and looking for a 9 in the aftermath of this than Jeff does, certainly. But what I want to start with is Puig, very quickly, and then I want to get back to the Galaxy, because there's all sorts of different ways to look at this. I feel so bad for this dude. And to be honest, much less importantly, I feel bad for me. This is the most, I think, genuinely the most entertaining player in Major League Soccer. Messi is wildly entertaining. Don't get me wrong. Same for Son Heung-min. But Puig is on the ball more than anybody else in this league. And he is amazing to watch. His ability to change speed and change direction, all of those things are mesmerizing to watch. And we're in Europe as well, to be clear. He just couldn't hang defensively. And the beauty of MLS is that he doesn't have to. And so it works so well. I am a bit worried that we're never going to see the same Riqui Puig again. And I'm sure he's worried about it too, right? I don't doubt that whatsoever. This has got to be one of the hardest things that he's ever gone through as a person. I just hope this is not a Joseph Martinez situation where he comes back after 2 surgeries on the same ACL and is just not the same guy. I'm really worried that is a possibility here, and we just won't know until 2027 at the earliest if he is in fact back for 2027. So that all sucks. Sucks for Riqui Puig more than anybody else. This is also brutal for the Galaxy. With Riqui Puig on the field this year, I think they're an MLS Cup contender where they've added, they haven't just added some talent at center back. They've added real players at center back in Jakub Glesnes in a trade from the Union and in Justin Hack picked up in free agency. They added those guys as a real answer to their weakness. Even in 2024, their weakness for most of the season was we can't really defend all that well. It's easier to defend when Riqui Puig isn't on the field. It's harder to do everything else, but it's easier to do that. But they're going to be better defensively than they've been since Riqui Puig showed up in Carson. So they've addressed that part of it. The question for them now is what we've been talking about, is what do they do, presumably, once they place Puig on the season-ending injury list? Because there's been no mention of that from the Galaxy, but I have a hard time fathoming how that would not be the case. So they're going to add another DP for this season. Where should they use it? And in my mind, there's really only 2 options here. One is, I think, Jeff, what you've alluded to, but maybe didn't say explicitly. One is sort of a midfield progressor or someone who can do some of what Riqui Puig does to help in the present, but is not so overlapping that when he comes back, hopefully crossing your fingers, that all of a sudden you have 2 of the same player. Not that you could find that in MLS, but you have two similar players, and that gives you a problem in 27 and beyond. I think really those are the 2 buckets for the Galaxy. I don't mind them going after it.
Can you say them again, Joe? Sorry. I was writing down center mid ball progressor and missed
DP striker or some sort of well-rounded center mid that can give you some ball progression that Puig would give you if you were healthy. Cool. Those are the 2 buckets. I don't mind the 9 if you find a versatile player, presumably, as Jeff has said, when you have 4 DPs, one of which is allowed in this case because of the season-ending injury list. When Puig comes back, you got to move one of those guys. Presumably, it would be one of the wingers. It's not going to be Puig, you'd have to imagine, and it's probably not going to be the guy who's been there for a season. So it's going to be one of the wingers. You move one of those guys, and all of a sudden, in 27, your DP contingent is Puig, it's a striker, and it's Peck or Paintsel. Probably Paintsel sticks around and Peck moves, right? That feels reasonable. That doesn't feel like an absurd roster construction format unless you miss on the 9. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. If they sign a good player, they're going to be good this year. They're not going to be great, but they're going to be good. If they don't hit on the 9, presumably if that's where they go as this DP, they're going to struggle a little bit. So I think that's kind of where the line is, to be honest, for the Galaxy right now.
I kind of wish is a bold statement. Kind of wish MLS was a little bit better in terms of its international reputation, because it would be fun if they could go out and get like a surplus to requirement central midfielder from any of the Premier League teams that seem to have like 4 or 5 of those who maybe aren't quite good enough for the Premier League, but I think could come in, play a season in Major League Soccer, be a designated player like on loan, and then go back and have that kind of experience. But I'm not sure if MLS gets enough credit from those big European clubs to be a league where you could go out and loan out a player and develop him, and then he comes back and he's even stronger. But that would be kind of the ideal for me, of like find a midfielder who isn't quite fitting, doesn't really seem like he's going to be in the plans, and give him that opportunity. Kind of what the Galaxy did with Puig in the first place, and why I agree with Joe that he's such an exciting and electrifying player. I don't really know what they do, but Joe, where do you have the Galaxy then if they do bring in, let's say they go with a DP number 9, and like he can score some goals, but obviously he's not going to facilitate and be quite as dynamic as Puig. Yeah. Where do you put them then in your playoff estimations?
I would certainly have them as a playoff team. The Galaxy at the end of last year were playing on a playoff pace, and they've gotten better. Like Riqui Puig not being around is not new, because we just saw a whole season of that. They've gotten better. Now they're going to have CCC again, which is going to be much more difficult now than it was with Puig in the plans. Mm-hmm. But I think they will still be a team that could potentially push for the 4th seed in the Western Conference. Like, it would not shock me if they get this 9 right, if that's where they land. I think they will still be a good team. I don't think they will be a truly great team. That is, I think, where the line is right now. I do want to say one thing on the center mid loan idea, Taylor, that you shared. I think that's really interesting. To me, that's not necessarily an issue of MLS's global reputation. Mm-hmm. I think it's a calendar problem, right? Where think about if you're a European team loaning out a player, or if you're an MLS team loaning in a player, do you really, and this was a situation maybe with Harvey Elliott in Charlotte when Charlotte expressed some interest there, do you want to play her for 6 months? I think probably you do, but in the Galaxy situation, that doesn't really do it for you, because you still need to finish the season, and then you're going to be missing a crucial player that you brought in. And if you're a European team, are you going to loan a player for a full year, for a full MLS calendar year season, to miss a player for the first half of next year? It's just awkward right now. I thought the
year and a half, Joe. Year and a half.
18-month loan. Make it happen. Yeah. I just think those situations are borderline impossible now, but will be much, much more possible later on. But that was my thought on your answer there.
That's a really
Jeff,
good point.
I'm curious what you think on the Galaxy and where you would have them landing next season.
The other factor I will say is adaptability. When you're going across an ocean, it's just a little bit harder to confidently project that the player is going to settle in and thrive when they're going an ocean away than if you're just sending them to Scotland or whatever, and they can come back over the midweek or whatever. The good news for the Galaxy is that the West is kind of poised to be worse somehow than it was in 25 at present. When you just like run through the list, it's like you have a lot of teams that were already competing in that sort of like best of the rest, and I'm saying like 6 through 5 through 15 in the conference, right? It was a very top-heavy conference last year, where the top 4 teams, maybe top 5 teams, were, you know, very like they could all contend on their day, but they all had their flaws that made them sit back in the Shield race and these sorts of things. That pack is thinning out a little bit. Seattle is running it back. They're pretty much just going all in on same squad. Obed's still here. Let's see what we can do in 26. And he might be gone after a World Cup if he makes the Mexico squad, and that might change things. You get to LAFC, new coach, Mark DeSantos, kind of running it back in that sense, retooling their roster. But, you know, it'll be much more of an ideological change as they move away from Steve Cherundolo. Vancouver Whitecaps, running it back. They've lost a couple of crucial players that we might get to today on the wings that could really change how opponents kind of game plan for them. And then you have Minnesota, who we'll probably get to later, who just don't really seem interested in contending anymore. So you have this group of teams then beneath them that are all still very prospective, and none of them really made the strides. Your Colorados, your Portlands, your Dallases, your Austins, your entire rest of conference that I haven't named yet, that are still just kind of figuring out. Like, we're probably a year away. We're making moves where we're hiring 30-something-year-old head coaches because we're trying to build long-term projects here. And so we're going to have more patience with it. Or we're trying to build around a homegrown player, or someone that we brought in with the cash transfer market who is young. All of this to say, I think that there is wiggle room for the Galaxy. Now, where they're going to struggle in the conference is that they have a downright plush underbelly at this point in midfield if they go in with a striker. My big issue, and I kind of alluded to it, where it just seems kind of like a foolish place for an MLS Cup team, and they're not contending for MLS Cup this year if Riqui Puig can't play. But strikers succeed when they get the service they need to score the goals. It's why Lade Lath didn't justify his return in year one is he didn't get the ball from Atlanta in the spaces he needed to and the ways he needed to be able to score the goals that would have justified the outlay. It's why Christian Benteke was such a good fit, because like DC United wasn't interested in playing these like really pretty intricate, moves or needing him to kind of create his own shot. They could just lump it onto him and he would score those. So they found a striker that fit whatever they would have called that, if they would call it a system or otherwise, and it worked. And I think right now there isn't clarity about how this works for the Galaxy to get upfield or to keep the ball from immediately flooding into the attacking third, their defensive third, in the event of a counter, because their midfield right now is just porous, right? And it's the same issue that they were actually able to exploit teams with in 2024 in their run to MLS Cup. And right now they're not really equipped to do the same in the inverse. And so that's where I kind of wonder about their priorities. Now, the good news is you talked about Glesnes and Hack, and I think that often when the free agent lists come out, we look at the Bentekes, we look at these, these big names and these designated players. Guys like Justin Hack are probably the most in demand in the market, and it's because of the versatility, it's because of the domestic quotient, it's because of the youthfulness, the upside, the tactical fits, and doing the thankless stuff that, was going to help the rest of their thing sing. So they are better on that end. I think Panic Stations is going to be a better moment for the Galaxy in 26. It's just that like lead up to it. It feels like you're not going to see a ton of midfield play right now on either side of it. And those are the sorts of times where you play pretty well, but you lose games, and it's kind of hard to win games you're not playing well in if you just don't have quality midfield play.
Here's my ludicrous counterpoint conspiracy theory. What if the Galaxy are like, look, we won MLS Cup in Messi's first season when he's out. The second season, he wins it, but Puig is injured, so we can explain it away. If we keep him injured for the third season, no one's going to expect us to compete with Inter Miami. Then he can come back and we'll win after Messi's a year older and maybe past it. And then we can claim that, no, we're still the institution of Major League Soccer. We're still the pinnacle of Major League Soccer. We just didn't have our guy for 2 years. I think there's a genius counter move in here, and I applaud the Galaxy for their trickery. Wow. I also applaud the Galaxy for actually signing center backs, a thing that Joe has talked about in every season preview for 4 years for the Galaxy at a minimum. So I'm glad that maybe they finally listened to Joe. Joe, do you feel validated?
I do feel validated. I think the Galaxy are so fascinating right now. This has turned them into such an interesting mystery box for 2026. I just want to state this before I assume we're going to break. I am far warmer on them, even without Puig, than it sounds like Jeff is. Jeff, you just said they're not an MLS Cup contender without Puig. That's probably true. Well, no, I don't agree. I don't agree with that. I think they're unlikely to win MLS Cup.
Didn't you say that earlier? You said that in the beginning.
Oh, well, I'm disagreeing with myself then. Whatever it is. As we talked about this more, whether I'm disagreeing with myself or just Jeff. Either way, me against the world. I think the Galaxy have an outside shot. I don't think they're going to be a top seed in the Western Conference. But if Marco Royce is healthy, if they nail the DP hit, and if Peck and Paintsell are playing real soccer and the defense is better and goalkeeping isn't tragic this year, which is a question, that's a good team. And in a Western Conference that I agree with Jeff is going to be fairly weak again relative to the East, that's a legit team and one that I could see making a run in MLS Cup. They're not going to win the Shield this year, but I think they're going to be a good team. Not a great team, but a good team.
I want to start...
All I want to say, just
go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, no, I just want to say Marco Royce turns 37.
Yeah.
I know. Hinging your case on it,
I'm not hinging. I'm not. Yeah. Okay, let's move on.
He's a young whippersnapper. Get out of here, Jeff. I want to start a new metric that is the if quotient and just how many ifs it takes for you to then be like, because the Galaxy last year had no ifs because it was basically they have no Puig, they have no room, there's nothing. Now it's if this and this and this and this, then they could. So it's only 4 or 5 ifs.
I love that, Taylor. I think that's a completely valid and actually quite interesting way to look at teams.
It's how to frame the season preview,
LAFC have very few ifs this year. San Diego, I think, have very few ifs this year. Vancouver have very few ifs. The Galaxy have more. Seattle have few ifs. The Galaxy have more. I'm not saying that they don't. They are not as good of a team. I don't expect them to be as good as any of those teams I just said. I still think, like Jeff said, they're going to be better than most of the bottom feeders in the West, and there's a bunch of them. And I think if they get hot at the right time with the collection of talent that they've assembled, they're going to be good. So I would say outside shot at MLS Cup, even without Puig, if they get the next DP right.
There we go. There's an if to round it all out. Lovely. We're going to come back. We're going to talk some new coaches, players on the move, lots of good stuff. A Romanian in D.C. Fascinating. Welcome back to the Total Soccer Show. We move to Columbus, who have a new head coach, and it's not Wilfried Nancy again. I like that Celtic held on to him just long enough for the Crew to make an appointment, and then Nancy was sacked. It would have been fascinating for him to go back to Crew, and we all just pretend like that did not happen. But instead, it's Henrik Per-Erik Rydström, who is relatively young. I think he's only like 49. Former Swedish international, played with Kalmar FF in Sweden for, I believe, forever. I think is the number there. From 94 to 2013, he made over 550 appearances. I think he, at one point, was the player with the longest professional career with one single club. He moves into management. He manages Kalmar. He manages Malmo. He wins the league with Malmo. Now he is with the Crew. Joe, this seems like an intriguing and very exciting hire to me.
I love this move, man. I've said this before. I've written it for Backheel earlier this week even. I think the quality of coaching in MLS is higher than it's been at any point in the league's 3-decade existence. I think we are seeing more and more teams have either clear visions themselves or hire coaches with clear visions. This looks like a decision from Columbus that absolutely fits what they've been doing. In Rydström, who is 49, as you said, just a young whippersnapper, formerly of Malmo, he is going to provide, at least in my expectation, a good bit of continuity from Wilfried Nancy. And I'm really curious to hear what Jeff thinks about this, because we still don't know a lot. Like, I haven't been grinding the Malmo tape by any means, but I've watched it a little bit. I've talked with some scouts, and it seems like everybody I talk to seems to say that this is going to be a lot of what we saw under Wilfried Nancy, where there's an emphasis on controlling possession, there's an emphasis on fluidity, where one way that I like to think about Wilfried Nancy's team, because that's how Pat Noonan thinks about it, and Pat Noonan knows more about soccer than I do, is with Nancy's teams in Columbus, really the only things that were fixed were the wingbacks. The wingbacks were mostly fixed high and wide, and everything else was a big old jumbled soup, right? And it made sense most of the time, but it was hard to predict where those pieces were going to land. And a lot of that is true with Rydström as well, where he is, I was going to call him Rydström coming into today's episode, and I've just shifted it because of how Taylor said it. So I'm going to assume he's right and I'm wrong. There's so much fluidity. The overload one side, there is like not a real positional play aspect to this. It is much more what we've seen Denitz in Brazil, butchered that, produced with a lot of fluidity and relationism, where players overload one side in extreme ways. And Nancy did some of that stuff already. So this looks like a good continuity hire of someone who's going to be really interesting tactically for the neutral as well. Jeff, I think this looks like a smart move from Columbus.
It looks like I like that it shows their homework a bit.
Yes.
It tells you what they were looking for. It's not a coaching appointment where you have to guess, right? There are quotes of Issa Tall pretty much just saying as much, like, we watched, and it was like watching a Wilfried Nancy team in Sweden, and we want that. So that works, right? And that's great. Like, you found probably, allegedly, again, like the results bear this out. This isn't just us having to take their word for it, bro. But you are taking their word for it that this is going to be functional. My question is, did they need to, like, are they as sure that they are as built for what Wilfried Nancy was doing in 2026 as they think they are? Like, I'm worried they're kind of leaning into nostalgia here, because here's some other, like, when I just look at the profile and these sorts of things, like, yes, this has been a very quote-heavy announcement, where it's not just that. There's also quotes from Rydström saying things like, I wish that I didn't like straight white man music and rock and roll, and I wish I liked disco more. Like, that's a quote that he said. He's like an avowed kind of political critic on the left side of the Swedish aisle, and so, like, you know, there's some Vanni Sartini vibes kind of coming off of him in that sense, where people are sharing a lot of his quotes to get excited in certain sects of Blue Sky. The other thing, though, he's 49, as Taylor alluded to. This is the first time in his life he's going to be working outside of his home country. And so there is also, again, to talk about adaptability when you're leaving, there are just some open questions about how that's going to change things. And you can look at the level of the Swedish league, and you can have your gripes. You could point out the fact that when he went head-to-head against Olof Mellberg in 2024, his team tied 2-2, and I would probably want my coach to do better than Olof Mellberg, but it's not a like
Great
for
pull,
like.
Jeff. That is
right?
such
Like,
a good pull.
It's not apples and oranges at that point. We're comparing like apples and lingonberries or something if it's Sweden. But I think at the same point, we're
comparing rusted industrial steel and Sweden.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Excellent. Rusted industrial.
I have so many shots I want to take at Ohio right now with what you've been like. Is he going to be excited to be in Ohio? Is he going to be like, what is this Wonderland? Or is he going to be like, so this is outside Sweden. Okay. Right. Sorry, Crew fans.
Yeah, no, but like Indiana's
worst.
There's just a lot to acclimate to. here, right? Where I wonder if there is going to be a period of necessity. And at that point, you kind of need to do simpler things, right? Like one of the issues with Celtic and Nancy at this point was a failure to give the time to acclimate and to recognize whether or not the squad fit the coach you were bringing in and how quickly they would be able to, work together. And it didn't. And in theory, this should be a smoother fit. There's just so much less that we know at this point where, I'm just going to sit back and say, we'll see. I think that when Jesper Sorensen was hired by Vancouver last offseason, it was one of the least talked about coaching appointments because there was just so little book on him. And frankly, the Vancouver Whitecaps hadn't given us a ton of reason for upside optimism until last year, just with the ability to outperform rather than perform to expectations. So we'll see. There's still some serious squad issues. I don't know if a similar system is going to be what it takes to get Dan Gazdag to sing, right? Hopefully just after another year it does, but you're still running with the same players by and large. That front three did not work down the stretch. It's what cost them that series against Cincinnati in the opener. And they haven't. Wessam Abu Ali has a big role to play in whether or not the season is going to work at this point. But I just talked to you about my feelings on DP strikers if the system behind them doesn't work. So copy paste that segment. We'll save some time.
Jeff, you said so many great things in there that I have so many things to say in response, and I'm going to forget half of them before I'm done. The first, on the DP side of things, 100% agree. The biggest question for Rydström and for Columbus is, can they get all three DPs, Rossi, Wissam Abu Ali, and Gazdag, functioning in the same team at the same time? Because it didn't work last year, and it was barely able to be tried last year because Wissam Abu Ali was injured the whole time, effectively. Gazdag was bad last year in Columbus. There's no doubt about that. Can those guys get on the same page? Can Rydström help them? That is a huge question, probably the biggest one. The other big one for Columbus, now that they've got their coach, is who's going to eat up Darlington Nagbe's minutes. And I would imagine they're going to bring somebody in that position. I don't know fully if that's going to happen or not. But it seems like getting the DP situation sorted and figuring out the Nagbe heir are the two biggest things on the list. I think one thing that Rydström has in his favor that is completely unlike the Nancy Celtic situation is that I don't think anybody has great expectations for the Crew in 2026. They have expectations, don't get me wrong. Does anybody really think the Crew are going to end up on top of the East? I don't. No. I don't think Columbus Crew fans do by any means. I think a lot of those folks are more critical about the team than we are. I think that they're going to be the bar for Columbus is, can we be a really good team next year? Can we maybe get a home playoff game in the playoffs or a home playoff series? That feels like where everybody reasonably would draw the line for this group. And then it's, well, can we build a little bit more into year two under Rydström and go from there? Everybody just recognizes right now that Miami are in their own stratosphere. Their offseason has been absurd, and we'll talk about that more in future episodes, I'm sure. But I think it is Miami, and then it is everybody else in the Eastern Conference right now, and Columbus are trying to be towards the top of that everybody else. I don't really think Rydström's going to have that much pressure on him. I think he's succeeding the biggest coaching name in MLS in quite some time, and that alone is going to give him a bit of grace stepping into his role. So I think there's a lot of this that's fun. I think there's a lot of this that could work, but there are still big questions to be answered.
Joe, are you more optimistic about the Crew under Rydström or SKC under Rafael Wicky?
The Crew by a bajillion miles, just because they actually have a roster right now. Unlike Sporting Kansas City, Wicky was the last coach, or Sporting Kansas City's coaching vacancy, to put this a different way, was the last one to be filled. So now we have 30 managers in Major League Soccer, just as it was meant to be. This is not an inspiring hire, Rafael Wicky to Sporting Kansas City. I don't necessarily think it's a bad one, right? So a lot of the narrative that I've seen around this hire is, haha, LOL, you just got the Chicago Fire coach when they sucked. That doesn't make any sense. I would not put much stock in Rafa Wicky's struggles with Chicago Fire when it comes to this appointment. The Fire just weren't set up to succeed. I mean, we've talked about this a bajillion times. Georg Heitz was probably the worst CSO in MLS, and he was buddies with Joe Mansueto, and all that worked together well for Chicago to be tragic. And Wicky was caught up in that poop storm, really, in Chicago. My read on this, and Jeff, I'm curious what you think. I think it's most likely that Wicky isn't going to massively impact this team, positively or negatively. I think he'll play the style that David Lee wants to play. I think he'll largely help Sporting Kansas City keep the ball in a reasonable sort of way. I don't think he's a ceiling raiser based off of his time in Chicago by any means. I don't think he really lowered their floor. Their floor was in the basement in Chicago, and they were dreadful, and that's about right. I think that would have been the case with most managers in MLS history. So where that leaves me is with one simple thought on Sporting Kansas City. Their players need to be good. And they're not going to have all those good players in 2026. That's just not going to happen because they have no players now. but they need to get a bunch of good players because I don't think they hired a manager that's going to make them more than the sum of their parts. But who knows? Maybe I'll be wrong. I don't think so, though.
I think we're spending a lot of time talking about his time in Chicago and less time talking about his very confusing time back in the Swiss Super League.
Well, that's why I left it for Jeff. That's why I left it for Jeff. Jeff pulled out the Swedish coaching matchups earlier, so I knew he could do the same in Switzerland.
I mean, it's just so weird. He wins the league and the cup. So they do the double one year. The next year has a horrifically bad run of form. They get knocked out of Europe, and he is sacked pretty aggressively in March, I want to say, and then has not had another gig until this point. So the snarky part of me wanted to make a joke there about anytime you can hire a guy who was fired last year and has had no offer since, you got to do it. At the same time, the more optimistic part of me wants to say he's also won things as a manager and had successes, and then there's the Chicago Fire of it all, but also who knows what's happening with young boys and what their situation is. That feels weird out of context. But
who knows what's going on with young boys?
You never know. You never know at the Wings.
TikTok dances, I think, is the answer, by the way.
That's
optimistic.
Yeah.
Look, we're building.
So I think it's another one. Sorry to put a point on it. It's basically another hire that I think is intriguing. I think I am less excited about than the Rydstrom hire, and I think I would be less excited were I an SKC fan. But at the same time, I struggle to think of the last time there was a slam dunk managerial appointment who was then a slam dunk in Major League Soccer. I feel like oftentimes it is the Montreal's sort of coach who wasn't thriving there makes the jump to Columbus, and then there we are. Or you get kind of people who find a way to get a team playing well. Even Mascherano, I would say. There were lots of questions about him. So there's opportunity there. There's possibility there. It does feel like a less inspiring hire in the end, though.
Yeah, and I don't think we've really had that slam dunk that paid off hire in the same way since I don't know, Bob Bradley in LAFC, Tata Martino in Atlanta. Right, you're right. It is kind of a rare occurrence when you have those Bruce Arena and the Revs, but all of those happened in the late 2010s. We've got this weird pipeline right now of soccer guys who failed with the Chicago Fire but thrived in Switzerland going right now with Xherdan Shaqiri and Rafael Vicky. And that's two guys, but that's
a trend.
It's weird that it's a trend, right? It's like that Stoke City to MLS pipeline that I've found from that mid-2010s relegation team. It's a weird one, Vicky's history in Switzerland, because he was also appointed to his first head coaching role from the youth academy after a board takeover with FC Basel. And 6 days later, they won the title. So theoretically, he actually does have another title on his name. He was just kind of elevated as they were sort of figuring out what to do with the club at that point. And then they finished second the next year, and then he got fired. And then he gets the Fire job. Everyone kind of knows what happens there. Then he coaches the US U17s. They get the group of death. I think it was Senegal, Netherlands, Japan. They're one of the worst performing teams at the 2019 U17 World Cup. He gets the Chicago Fire job, doesn't do well there, goes back to Young Boys. And the feeling with Young Boys was just that he wasn't going to be able to elevate the ceiling, and that he was going to be a coach who could generally keep them in the top two. It's them in Basel every single year in that league. And sure enough, it was them in Basel, but it didn't go well. He wasn't, again, developing players to make them more of a selling club. He wasn't performing well whatsoever in Europe, and then gets kind of just kicked to the curb and no one else takes a look. And sometimes you wonder and say, okay, if a coach has coached Young Boys in Basel, there isn't really another job in Switzerland that's going to appeal to them in the same way, unless they're willing to go into sort of more of a project, which isn't something you see a manager in their mid-40s usually do. So maybe it makes sense. For Sporting Kansas City's purposes, though, I think he comes in with a gap year where maybe he's a little humbled. Maybe he's been doing a lot of research. Maybe he's been embedding with a lot of other coaches to see how they operate, how they work with their clubs, what he can change about his structure, his system. There's real potential there. And I would imagine he interviews very well if he's getting these jobs, right? I think for David Lee's purposes, though, as a new chief soccer officer, I think Rafael Vicky is someone who knows the league, who is going to be able to come in, who shouldn't be able to make rookie mistakes with management like we saw Mascherano make for the first 3 months of the year, for example, right? You're not going to have that same sort of adjustment period you need to account for. And it helps you assess the squad as you're reconstructing basically a brand new soccer team with very few holdover players from the Peter Vermees era. And if it doesn't work, people aren't going to really be like, wow, I can't believe it didn't work. But people won't be surprised if this does turn them into a Colorado Rapids, Portland Timbers, Minnesota United level, kind of you could get fifth in a good year in the Western Conference because the conference is a bowl of soup. So, yeah, it can work. There's a path where this works. It has much more to do with the squad that he creates. Yep. And right now there isn't a squad yet.
Jeff, will that be in the official MLS marketing and branding for 2026? Western Conference : bowl of soup.
That's the second time Soup's come up on this episode, by the way. I mean, just electric moment for Soup right now.
We're in midwinter, my friends.
Yeah, we are.
There was also a lot of ifs that just came up in discussing SKC. Yes. So if the Galaxy had like 4 or 5 ifs.
10, 12, 15.
There we go.
I'd say there's 11 on a field at any given time right now. So
some incredible bargaining by Joe. 10, 12, 15.
Higher, whatever it takes. I mean, all those ifs are for 26. Like, no one in Kansas City thinks that team is going to be a really good team in 2026. There's not a single person, player, coach, scout, whatever, who thinks that. So we shouldn't think it either, and we shouldn't expect them to be good in 2026. They'll be judged on what happens after that because their rebuild is one that's going to take a couple of seasons.
An optimistic note to end on for the residents of Kansas City and the surrounding metropolitan area. We're going to come back. We're going to talk to Minnesota. We're going to talk DC. We're going to talk a few more teams. I'm excited. I hope you are too. Back soon. Welcome back to the Total Soccer Show, everybody. During the break, Joe said he was very excited to talk Minnesota United because he loves each and every one of their moves. But I'm going to turn it to Jeff, noted Minnesota United superfan, Jeff Reuter, to talk through what Minnesota's been up to this offseason.
PK Loon himself right here.
I think I lied about every single part of that. Go ahead, Jeff.
That's okay. That's a good podcast. Often is built on a lack of trust.
Is baiting and trapping you into positions? That's what I do.
We say that. It's kind of true, sadly. No, with Minnesota United, look, their offseason has been summarized quite well by Matt Doyle as a lot of players who would rather be playing soccer. To paraphrase him, is players who are looking and saying we didn't really get to do what we wanted to do in 25. And that includes winning a trophy, by the way, because, of course, they did have a run to the semifinal. Tani Oluwaseyi goes to Villarreal. They never replace him. It all falls apart from there, right? Now we're back. And we have a new goalkeeper. Goalkeeper of the year, Dane St. Clair, has signed as a free agent for less money at Inter Miami. You have Robin Lod going to the Chicago Fire, Hassani Dotson going to the Seattle Sounders. You've got a couple of replacements from within the league, Drake Callender in goal, Tomas Chankalai coming in as kind of a creaty, dribbly boy. I'm not sure where he fits in a Ramsey system, if it's as constructed like last season, probably in one of those dual 10 sort of roles. And Eric Ramsey now being linked to the newly opened Strasbourg job, which is now, again, vacated because Liam Rosenar is going to Chelsea. I think that's official, right?
Seems like it's happening, yes.
Yeah. I swear I woke up to that announcement. Maybe I missed it. Anyway, it seems likely that job will be open, and I think that's a better fit for Wilfried Nancy, but that's not the segment. You look at Minnesota United right now, and I've been talking with a lot of people about, like, within the league ecosystem, just kind of about, like, so what is going on? Like, from your outside perspective, what is happening right now? And the consensus I'm hearing is that it just kind of looks like they're trying to keep a smaller market ownership group afloat. And they're making business decisions, and, you've got a situation where you've got
Jeff,
a coach.
Do you have a gun to your head? What's happening?
No, here.
They are making decisions.
I'm choosing my words here because it's just like it's so early off season that, like, this whole thing could come together in a beautiful way, and suddenly they're playing tiki-taka. Like, MLS is just that kind of league where you can make 4 moves and your whole thing changes.
Yep.
They haven't made those moves since 2019. Like, that scale of move where they can radically change. A lot of the core that is now leaving was still brought in by the predecessor to the current CSO, right? Khaled El Ahmad, who came in from Barnsley, previously worked as a City Football Group scout, mostly with the New York City FC side of the branch. And every negotiation is... There's money to be left on the table. There's money to be taken on the table. And it feels like they're kind of nickel and diming it more than they used to at this point. It's sort of the reputation that they're building within the league. And you look at it within some of these moves, and they offered, like, great money to Dane St. Clair. that's been reported, and I think at this point that's the player deciding what's a better situation for them in their career going into a World Cup. Training with Lionel Messi probably makes a lot of sense. Drake Callender, I think, is a really good replacement for him from within the league. Another World Cup hopeful, can get himself very easily back into contention for third, I would say, in Pochettino's squad if he's in form. It's just like, it's very unclear the direction this thing is going. If Ramsey leaves, now you've also set a precedent that they might not even hire a coach before the start of the season, which is just not a serious position as a soccer club either. It just looks like contention isn't the focus right now. We're waiting for a lot of other moves to come in. They have a ton of allocation money.
So much.
They've just been so much slower to spend it that a lot of people within the league are looking and saying, like, is that just kind of the prize to be the team with the most potential? And if we decide to have ambition, we'll actualize that. But right now, they're just not making the moves that make them look anywhere close to as competitive as they were in 25.
I'm still confused about Drake Callender. So Inter Miami to Charlotte, then to Minnesota for Dane St. Clair to go from Minnesota to Inter Miami. I guess not that confusing. Just still feels like a weird circuitous travel route.
But
maybe it was
like
all planned.
it's a weird indirect trade situation. Taylor, I was waiting to cut in because you had your thinking face on, and I had no idea which direction you were going to go in. Drake Callender was a valid direction to go in. I want to go back to what Jeff has said, and I think a key tenet to all this is the ownership situation. So I've spoken with Khaled El-Ahmad multiple times, and he has made it clear, and not in a disrespectful way, but he's made it clear politely about their lack of resources as a club, right? I mean, Minnesota United are not going to outspend almost any team in Major League Soccer when it comes to their first team roster. That is a directive that is seemingly coming down from ownership. They're not going to spend a lot on the first team roster. They're not going to spend a lot on transfer fees. They haven't done so really ever effectively, and they're not going to spend a whole lot on salaries. So that's part of this. I think we need to be careful, though, when we talk about Minnesota United and that reality, when we maybe think about how they could compete or could not compete, because we have evidence in MLS that spending on first-team rosters and success is not correlated whatsoever. The Philadelphia Union don't spend on rosters. We can talk about the play style all day long, whatever it is. They have been a consistently good team in the Eastern Conference for the last 7 seasons, whatever. It's been a big number now. They don't spend anything on transfer fees. They don't spend anything. Okay, they did break their club record transfer fee this year.
You know why that is, Joe?
Go on.
Their academy. You know what Minnesota doesn't spend money on either?
Their academy.
Absolutely, like, famously one of the worst academies in the league.
You're 100% correct. But it's also true that with the Union, they have hit on an absurd number of budget talents from overseas. It is possible to build a good MLS team playing or recruiting the way that Minnesota United are trying to recruit and the way that the Union are trying to recruit. I grant that the academy side is a huge, huge part of the Union's success. But it is not as if, and I'm not saying that you said this, Jeff, but I've seen a lot of sentiment about this from Minnesota United fans. It's not like, oh, we lost Dane St. Clair. Oh, we lost Robin Ludd, 32-year-old Robin Ludd. Oh, no,
right.
Like we're screwed. In the Western Conference, no less. Like that is just not the reality here for Minnesota United.
Oh, of course.
Their 2 biggest moves of the offseason have been losing St. Clair and losing Ludd on the outgoing side. Both be a free agency. I still think Ludd's a good player, by the way. I'm not trying to say he's not. I think he's a great signing for what Chicago need him to be. Yeah. But I think Callender is a worse player than St. Clair, but not dramatically so. And I don't think Chancalay is a worse player than Ludd if used properly. And he's 5 years younger. I think the Chancalay pickup for peanuts, and he's not going to be a DP there, so they still have a DP spot if they want to use it, which is a big if. I think that's a good addition. So I think really goalkeeper is the only place that you've really gotten worse this year, and you have oodles of cap space to do something. The question for Minnesota is what comes next? Are they going to use that cap space? I would have to assume that they're going to use a whole bunch of it. And will they use a DP spot? And, oh, by the way, does something happen with Eric Ramsey? Which is a big question, don't get me wrong. I think another big macro question, Jeff, that you sort of posed, and this is a fascinating one that I don't have an answer to, is can Minnesota United sustain their style of play? Like, will players continue to want to do that, to sit and to sit deep and to do all the set piece stuff that's really boring? Can that be incentivized to continue the Minnesota United style of play that made them into what they were last year, right? They had a good collection of talent, don't get me wrong, but their style elevated them even beyond the collection of talent for most of the season. I don't know if that can continue. I would assume it could continue at least for a little bit longer. We've seen the Red Bulls do it for years on end. We've seen the Union do it right now, and it's working for them. I would imagine Minnesota can, but in the long term, it is an interesting question to see if they can continue to pull this off. But I've seen a whole lot of sentiment about Minnesota are done, like they're not going to be any good in 2026. I think that's extremely foolish. I think that is like just so not right. Are they an MLS Cup contender? As constructed, I think absolutely not. But could they be a contender to win the West in the postseason with one more piece in the attack, like a Tani replacement? I think so, right? I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility, but they still need to add to this roster. There's no doubt about that.
You all have me wondering from the Minnesota chat, and I could not find an answer in my abbreviated searching while trying not to crash my computer, so maybe this is a question for another day. Which team do you think has the lowest record transfer fee paid in Major League Soccer?
That's a great question. I mean, Montreal is my gut, certainly.
Yeah, because Drogba was a free, right? And like DeVio would have been a free back in the day too. Piatti, I think, would have come on a free transfer as well.
That's an interesting question.
Montreal's a really good guess. It's not DC now, I can tell you that.
Transfermarkt hasn't been working on my computer for the last week, so really I have no way to check this. But
the last two times I crashed during recording was when I tried to open Transfermarkt, which is why
when
I
Googled
it,
y'all, right?
It gave me a lot of obviously incorrect answers. Thank you, Gemini and ChatGPT. But it did also link me to a Transfermarkt article that I was like, haha, nice try. I'm not taking the bait, the devil. But what I will do is move us to DC United. The aforementioned. We'll come back to Philly, time permitting, but we have to get to DC because in the notes it says DC United splash for a Romanian guy. So we're all feeling this move, Joe? We're all really excited about it?
So that Romanian guy, which I just didn't want to type out when I was doing the doc, is, I also don't know how to say his name, to be totally honest, Louis Montagnier, maybe? Lois Montagnier? Probably did both. Louis Montagnier?
Montiano? I don't
know.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, Munteanu, that feels more likely. He's coming in from the Romanian top flight for what's been reported by Tom Bogert and others as a $7 million fee plus add-ons that could see it rise to $10 million. He does not look like a bad player, to be clear. He has only scored a couple of goals this year. He won the Golden Boot, though, last season in the Romanian league. He had 19 non-penalty goals. The player just underneath him in goals, I believe, was Mitrița, who was formerly at NYCFC. That didn't go very well. So maybe there's a little bit of a warning sign there. It doesn't look like a bad player, but what this deal reminds me of, and we'll zoom out to look at DC's offseason in a second, but just this deal, is Brandon Vasquez. And what I mean by that is Brandon Vasquez is not a bad player. Austin FC paid an absurd amount of money to sign Brandon Vasquez last season. Like, just head-scratching, mind-boggling money to sign Brandon Vasquez to a DP deal. So I think Luis, I'm just going to go with that for now until I hear otherwise, could be a really useful player for DC United. Alongside Ty Baribo, I feel like there's a front two there that works in a system that is looking more and more like it's going to be boom ball every day that passes this offseason, which is fine. Like, that's a fine way to play. I think that this could work. I'm just shocked at the money that you've basically spent on a player who had one really good season in the Romanian top flight.
Yep.
Which, there's a lot of ifs around that, but there are fewer ifs around DC as a whole right now than there have been in probably a while, which is weird to say, but I think it's true.
I'm mixed on this one, not surprisingly, because you like the positives there that we've outlined are pretty positive. He's a young striker with like international pedigree. Was the Golden Boot winner in his league not too long ago. Had a ton of interest from clubs including Celtic and Valencia. I think Lyon in there as well. And what it sounds like is he has the breakthrough season where he scores a ton of goals, elevates his performance, and then gets linked with a bunch of different clubs, all of whom put in bids, but Cluj, his Romanian club at the time, holding out for like a number close to like $18 to $20 million. And so interest cools remarkably. And then he basically...
The transfer market is so broken. I'm sorry. I just have to interject.
Yep.
Guys, we're going to wait. The $20 million's coming. Just wait. It's going to happen.
It's crypto.
Okay, no, never mind. Yeah.
It's crypto mentality here. Like, okay, anyway. Line go up. Keep going.
I think you meant the website still. You meant the actual system of transfers. Gotcha.
Both ends.
Maybe both.
Both ends.
But it sounds like basically his head is turned. He thinks he's getting a move. Cluj don't get the offer they want. They hold on to him. He kind of loses focus. And as a result, now has, as I mentioned earlier, 2 goals in the 14 games. He drops from that season where he is the Golden Boot winner. He's 0.76 goals per 90. He is now at 0.20 goals per 90. And it's worth noting, slightly. It's also worth noting that in the 2 seasons prior to when he wins the Golden Boot, he takes like the same number of shots. And so it's basically he has that one season which does end up feeling like an outlier, had his head turned, now is not playing at the same level. So there's the positive way of seeing that is that he needed a move, he got a move, now he's moving to DC United, and maybe he's going to be focused and locked in and really electric and exciting. Counterpoint would be he's a player who had one good season, kind of caught fire, didn't get the move he wanted, pouted, and now here we are. Maybe it will go well, maybe it won't. It makes me sort of feel like maybe DC United saw an opportunity for a player who was valued really highly, had the value fall, but if he does well one season, now that value goes back up and we can make a move. That's maybe being too pessimistic, but I refuse to be too optimistic about DC United at this point.
It's good for your health at this stage, I'd say.
It's funny how quickly I started to try to talk myself into this before being like, why? Why am I pretending like DC United have changed and are going to be a different entity until they actually are? Why give them that credit?
What's interesting to me is that usually when you see clubs go for, like MLS teams go for players from leagues that are kind of, let's say, like off the usual, right? So like not signing from the Big Five of Europe, not signing from Mexico, not signing from the major South American nations, maybe Holland or whatever. But like there's just kind of these same like 8 or 10 leagues that usually you're seeing international players sign from towards Major League Soccer, right? And usually when you break that, the idea is that there is market value to be found there and that you're exploiting the margins and the inefficiencies of the transfer market. And so you can get a deal, and that's going to help your team do better economically because you were clever. This looks like an overspend. And that's a problem, right? Like, you could have absolutely applied that transfer fee and gotten a more projectable, sure thing transitioning from a league that has had a better track record of success in Major League Soccer in terms of acclimation, game style, all of these sorts of things that you do in your scouting and your recruitment analysis. So in that sense, I agree with Joe. It feels a little bit like Brandon Vasquez, where it's just like you're paying more for the statement of it all, right? And just kind of for the see what a big deal he could be and all of that. And you're right, Taylor, like the data doesn't really show a sure thing scorer. The good news is, though, they did bring in a sure thing scorer. And there is a chance that while Sweet Lou is acclimating to the league, and we will learn how to say that by the season.
That's my new favorite thing, no doubt.
As long as he's facilitating well, he should pick up 7 or 8 pretty mindless assists because Ty Baribo is there. And they actually did, I think, a good usage of the cash transfer market, which I continue to think undervalues players because they're in Major League Soccer, even though you can confidently say they'll give you a better return on a $22 million striker from the championship because they've been in MLS and they've been scoring goals. Like the Dejan Joveljic versus Lade Loth outlays, it's not a like-for-like scenario by any stretch of the imagination in terms of like how it helped their teams, how their teams did, but both teams missed the playoffs by a lot, and one of them saved about $15 million on a striker who didn't get them to the playoffs. So that's good. I think with Baribo, though, he'll continue to score. I think that he is someone who can fit in a lot of different looks. I think he's an instinctive goal scorer. I think that he is a good sort of successor to Christian Benteke, who does a little maybe more variety in how he's going to be able to work in the final third, which will help them kind of break away from what you've seen the last few years in DC. And then you look at some of the other moves that they're making from within the league, and Sean Nealis and Sean Johnson coming in. And those are just like, those are good corn-fed American moves that generally every team who makes the playoffs in MLS has to make a few of, right? And so in that sense, they are better. I agree with Joe. I think that right now this is already a more talented roster than you had in 2025 and probably 2024 as well. So that's encouraging for DC. And that, to put a bow on, I guess, a point I really wanted to make today. If everything behind the striker is working better, the striker and the forwards are more likely to succeed because of the team behind them. And I think that this is just another case where it's a little easier to project that it's not going to be a catastrophe when he turns around. It's not going to be like the Dark Knight Rises, where suddenly they took a shot and then it didn't go in and they turn around and the field has imploded underneath them. And they don't know what their defense did.
Though
it's not going to be that.
If there were to be a field that would implode, I think Audi Field would be high on the list. Just if they're looking to remake that film, it's an option. I'll say that much. I think the thing that still needs to be done.
Are we already there at this point with DC that we're already making stadium jokes again? I thought we were done with RFK, but I mean, it's fair.
It was just sitting there. It was just sitting there.
I love that one emergency exit in the crowded upper deck. That's really great.
It's good.
Anyway,
it's good.
Yeah.
Jeff, you're talking about the strikers need things behind them to work. Most strikers need things behind them to work for them to succeed. That's true. Obviously, that's true. DC don't have that yet. That's the thing. And maybe they're going to address that thing via boom ball, right? And when I say that, I'm thinking just like a lot of vertical passes into the two strikers, and you don't really need a classic number 10 in that sense. The Union did it, and it worked for them. So it's definitely possible to do in MLS, so maybe they don't need that player. Maybe they're still looking. I would imagine if they're looking to make more moves this offseason, which they should be, central midfield is the area that those moves will happen, because they've already added guys. what looks like 5 starters. 5. I don't think any other MLS team has done that so far this winter, at least not that I can think of. They've added Sweet Lou. They added Baribo. That looks like a front 2 to me. They've added Sean Johnson. That's a new goalkeeper. They've added Sean Nealis. All these names have been said already. They've also added a left back from Japan, whose name I don't have written down. They've also moved Boris Enow out of this team. At least reportedly, it looks like he's moving. And I would assume there are other outgoings still to happen. The good doctor is making moves to this team. We have a lot of evidence at this stage. And to be honest, the moves look pretty good by and large. They don't look great. Again, I'm not sold on Sweet Lou by any means. I think it was an overpay for Baribo. I mean, you run through these things, but they're better. They're going to be a better team. I think that they are a team whose wooden spoon odds have plummeted, and that is exactly what the goal should have always been for DC United this offseason. I know it sounds ridiculous.
It
That's
doesn't.
the
It
reality.
just sounds painful.
They've been a joke of a club for so long. Since I've been doing this job, they've been a joke.
Yeah.
And they look less funny now than they have since I've been doing this, which is real, genuine progress.
And instead, they're exporting and sharing their pain. Because I enjoyed seeing a thread from Minnesota United supporters that was discussing the possibility of going for Christian Benteke since he was a free agent.
Yes.
And it was like a lot of informed points and stats and and then if you searched by new instead with the comments, it was all just like expletives as it was announced mid-conversation that he had signed for Al Wada instead. Yeah. So DC United, Minnesota can unite in their sadness regarding Christian Benteke. But Joe, I'm glad
they're united.
There you go. Joe, I'm glad that if nothing else, they maybe won't win the wooden spoon this year. Big time.
Yeah, I don't think they will.
There was a player mentioned. I'm wondering if either of you are familiar. It kept being referred to amongst DC supporters that I was reading as the Sorga signing. Are you familiar with Sorga? Eric Sorga,
yes.
more specifically.
Yeah, striker. He played some in USL, I believe, as well.
Yeah. He was brought in. He plays 21 games for DC, scores the 1 goal. Is not quite the same at all.
United, but 1 game for Loudoun United. Let's go. Good job, mate.
There you go, Joe. But I believe was the leading goal scorer in Estonia at the time, and it sounds like basically DC United saw that and were like, let's see what that guy can do, and spent some money and brought him in, and then it turns out he could not do much. So there's some concern that this signing will be similar to that, but I do think there's a different pedigree there and a different track record so far. So we shall see what happens with Montiano. You mentioned Baribo. We should mention very quickly what is going on in Philadelphia, which is, it seems like bleeding resources and then question marks. Is that about the offseason so far for Philly?
It's a trust the process offseason, right? And I think that, like,
didn't they already sell Austin Trusty? Can we still trusty the process if he's
Philly? We're always trusting process.
In Philly, there's nothing left to trust but the process. And yeah, look, keep in mind, Ernst Tanner is still under a second investigation after reporting by Pablo Mara at The Guardian into discretions and harassment and whatnot. You can read that. It's more thorough than what I just said. But suffice it to say, they're doing this without the usual architect of their off seasons and their transfer windows, right? And so right now, you're seeing much more of the exit phase of the off season before the enter phase, and again, that's a lot of faith in your academy continuing to prop you up, right? And this is something that Philly can lean back on, maybe with more faith in the wall behind them than any other team in MLS, is that there will be talent, that there are players coming through in key positions, that they have already made some transfers who have been kind of squad guys who are going to be able to step in and become starters now, right? But Kai Wagner is the latest one going to Birmingham City. It was fun because I think at first it was reported as Championship Club Birmingham, and there was actually a credible question to ask if it was the Birmingham Legion in the USL Championship. So it isn't.
Credible is carrying a lot of weight in that sentence.
Thank you. And he's been crucial, right? He has been the best left back in Major League Soccer for 5 years, maybe more. And so losing him hurts. There isn't really a like for like to be found there. You throw in Glesnes going across the conference border. You've got Baribo going to DC United. Rival, not rival, probably not. Mikel Ua, probably got, right? Like, it's just there's a lot of players who are leaving here. Quinn Sullivan, of course, had an injury late in the season, so you're not projecting that he's ready for preseason probably. He's not coming back until the middle of the season. So maybe we're going to see a lot of Kevin Sullivan in 2026. That might be time, and he might need to be ready to play more minutes than maybe you would have projected in his ideal kind of onboarding phase for such a young player. But I think again, it's who is going to be making the talent ID calls on who replaces, and generally, are they willing to spend to make up for the talent that they've lost, which has not been the story of the Philadelphia Union so far. It's expensive to buy starting level players in the transfer market, and that's where small market teams without an academy do struggle. Is if you don't have the ability to kind of produce from within, which is much more affordable.
The ranking of Philadelphia Union players who have left the club over the last 2 years, in terms of I'm least worried about replacing them to I'm most worried about how to replace them.
I like the scale.
The scale tips with Kai Wagner on one end of it. And Kai Wagner is by far the one that I think is the hardest to replace of this crop. So they've lost 2 center backs, Jack Elliott and Glesnes, over the last 2 off seasons. They didn't miss Jack Elliott last year at all.
Not really.
So
No.
Glesnes, I think they could miss a bit more because Makanya is not coming through the door because he's already there. And so I don't know who that player is. Maybe that player does exist. I don't think they miss Leon Flack. I don't think they miss Jack McGlynn. I don't think they miss Daniel Gazdag. I don't really think they're going to miss Baribo or Ura. Not that they're bad players. I think they're useful players. But Damiani looks real good, and they've already splashed on a 20-year-old striker from Sweden. They've hit on every striker they've signed, really. So I don't think we should have a lot of doubts about those players producing. But Wagner is one of one, as Jeff said. There's not another left back like him in Major League Soccer. He was their best chance creator. And now heading into 2026, you're missing out on your 2 best chance creators. You're going to miss Quinn Sullivan for most, if not all, of the season. And you don't have Kai Wagner anymore. That they only got $2 million for him, by the way, is astonishing to me.
Yeah,
how
that's
good he's
criminal.
been. That is a crazy low number to move to an uninspiring, no offense, Birmingham City destination. Like, I don't know. That all seems quite odd to me. This is the biggest test for Philadelphia. Of all the players they've moved, of McGlynn, of any of these dudes, Wagner is the one that is going to be the hardest to replace, and he could be the one that has the biggest knock-on effect to their system as a whole. Because if they can't replace him like for like, which I don't think they can, but maybe if there's a team that could do it, it might be the Union. But if they can't replace him like for like, do you need to find that from elsewhere? Like, how does this impact the recruitment in other positions? I don't know. I am warmer on the Union being pretty good next year than it sounds like most people are. But at this stage, they don't look like they're going to be anywhere near the Shield race at this moment of the offseason anyway.
Joe, would you rather Caleb Wiley play for Philly next season or John Tolkien?
Ooh, I would rather Caleb Wiley play because I think he's a more interesting player, and that would mean that I would get to watch him more.
Nice. Good answer. I also think he adds more width and defensive responsibility.
Feels
whatever. So there's soccer reasons I can say it too. I agree. I think that the other thing to add with Philly and why there's so much pessimism is that there was a lot of concern about overperformance. Because it's Philly.
As a city,
by its
yeah,
nature.
yeah.
Unfortunately, one of the most choke-prone organizations in MLS in terms of on-field performance.
They booed Santa Claus, Jeff.
I need listeners to know that Jeff was smiling as he said that. Just a little.
I think I was anticipating. I can't even say I was anticipating the Philly Santa Claus booing. No, I think that the other thing though is like how much is it going to regress in year 2? Because Carnell, once his system was found out in St. Louis and the talent floor didn't raise at all from year 1 to year 2, it was a lot easier to game plan around St. Louis, and he was forced out. I don't think that's going to happen again. I think that was more of a St. Louis issue and more of the squad Lutz Pfannenstiel had constructed issue than a Bradley Carnell is still here doing
I believe
the
you'll
same
find
thing
that
issue.
Microsoft spreadsheets assembled that squad. Thank you very much. After
I think
4
so.
billion data points.
It kind of seems like it. Like it was just nuts. And the squad's more coherent as constructed right now. So I don't think that that's going to happen the same way. But the question is, are they going to be able to overperform? Keep in mind that we're talking about the reigning Shield winner, right? Like we're not talking about just some team, like every other team that we talked about in this segment, where it's like they made the playoffs and then they have some questions and we're not sure, like Minnesota United. Like this is genuinely a team that was contending on all fronts and was one of the favorites, not the favorite, I would say, for MLS Cup in 2025. And they have fallen off of that rate in terms of their squad balance, I would say. Will they be able to get back up there? I don't know. I just like right now we don't have the evidence of who are the next 4 guys coming through the academy who can make that, and then who are the targets that they could actually identify and bring in at this point without their sporting director right now, who again is not in the room. So I just think generally we're looking at. I would agree with Joe. I'm rosier than I think a lot of people seem to be around it, but I'm rosy in a like 4 through 6 in the East, like a Charlotte FC zone or the Chicago Fire in 26, where I project them to be, which is not contending with Miami and then not contending with the next 2 teams who are in the second tier, but they're in that third tier of really, really good teams that are going to be tough any single week. And I think Philly is still has a skeleton that can be fleshed out that could put them into that zone very, very easily.
There we are. Gentlemen, we've talked about, I think, 6, 7 teams maybe today. But, you got to use the full hour to get through every single team that we talked about. But really, when it is the most fascinating part of the season, aside from the playoffs. But the offseason is always great. New coaches, new players, players on the move. Who knows what's going to happen? It is always very intriguing, and I'm always very excited to talk with you all about it. Jeff Reuter, thank you, my friend, for smiling at the negativity of Philadelphia in a loving way.
Sure. Yeah, new year, new smiles. Why not?
And Joe Lowry, all-time appearance leader in the Finnish second division. Thank you so much for your appearance today, my friend.
That's true.
Happy to do it. Can't wait to sign for DC United.
It's going to be $15 million, sight unseen. What could go wrong? Lots is the answer. Listeners, thank you all so much for listening. Greatly appreciate it. Nice to be back. Excited to talk to you, and excited to talk to you again very soon.